Now, underweight is a composite measure. And as a composite measure, it's a composite measure of stunting and wasting. It allows us to capture both acute and chronic malnourishment. And again, the WHO using that same approach, taking the measurements, converting them to z-scores, and greater than 2 standard deviations below the mean, the child is classified as underweight. In India, and this part of the slide over here, India's contribution to the underweight burden in the world is enormous. The high proportion of child undernutrition, combined with the large population base, has made India the country with the largest number of stunted, wasted, and underweight children in the world. According to a recent UNICEF estimate, India accounts for 31% of the developing world's children and 42% of those that are underweight. So we're talking about a country in which the condition of the children is quite poor, and there's a lot of work that's done and a lot of work that still needs to be done to address this problem. In 2005-2006, using the National Family Health Survey, looking at children who are under 3 years of age, you can see in all of India, 45% of the children are stunted, 23% of the children are wasted, and 40% of the children are underweight. It's worse in the rural areas, and only slightly better, but better only by comparison in the urban areas. The other end of the issue, overnutrition. This is the other extreme. There is a great deal of disagreement still about how to measure overnutrition in children, but often we use height for weight. We use weight for height. And the WHO, again, using that same formula, we're going to convert the anthropometrics into z-scores, and in this case, it's greater than 2 standard deviations above the mean we classify as being overweight. So now we've talked about how we measure child malnutrition, both underweight and overweight in children. We're going to switch to adults. So measuring adult malnutrition. We've all heard about the BMI, the dreaded BMI. That's what we tend to use with adults is the BMI. It's easy to do in the field, and so this is something you can do with population-based studies. Now, there's something really important to note. I have 2 different groups, general and Asian. Asians, most Asians, research has been done, and this research is pretty recent, that has shown that the risks associated with underweight occur at about the same BMI in both the rest of the world as well as most of the Asian population. But the risks associated with being overweight start to mount at a much lower BMI for Asians than they do for the general world, kind of the rest of the world population. And so that means that the window of appropriate healthy weight is a little bit narrower in most Asian populations than it is in the world in general. And so later on, when you see some things, you need to know that the BMIs, the cutoffs that we're using for normal weight, overweight, and underweight are based on this Asian classification and this framework. Now, we saw the conditions of underweight, stunting, and wasting among Indian children. Now, this is the percentage of overweight adults in all Indian states, and then this one way over here is all India. Blue are male, red are female. And as you can see, some states, such as Punjab, you've got over 37% of the women are overweight, and over 30% of the males are overweight. In other states, Tripura, Jharkhand, you've got just over 5% of males and females being overweight. So there's a great deal of difference comparing one state to another. The state that I was in is in Kerala. It's considered to be a bit of an outlier in India. It has very high rates of literacy in both male and female, adult literacy in male and female. Literacy rates that are similar to what we find in the developed world. You have very low rates of maternal morbidity, low rates of child morbidity. Again, similar to what we find in some developed countries. So this state is a state that's highly educated, with a very sophisticated public health system, where just about 100% of the women are able to get care around their pregnancies, and children are immunized, and there's infrastructure in place to do this. Now in Kerala, you'll see just under about 24% of the males, about 24% of the men are overweight. About a third of the women are overweight. And one thing to note about Kerala, a third of the women are overweight, a third of the women are underweight. So that means you have 2/3 of your population experiencing one form of malnutrition or another. So that takes us to the dual burden of malnutrition. This is sometimes referred to as paradoxical malnutrition, where you have a co-occurrence of overnutrition and undernutrition within the same country, community, household, or even lifespan. And this is going to require a much more complex response than if you were dealing with only undernutrition or only overnutrition alone. As I mentioned in Kerala, about a third of the women are overweight and a third of the women are underweight. And this situation is where the dual burden of malnutrition is present within that state. It creates challenges to response. It overtaxes already stressed healthcare systems. And India is currently poised to be the leader in diabetes in the world by 2020. So we're talking about really kind of on the precipice of some very significant public health crises that were unexpected, really kind of the crises that we're facing, plus the crises they already had in place with the undernutrition and all of the other problems that were there. Now, within a household, the dual burden is found when one person in the household is overweight and another person in the household is underweight. And often the overweight person is the mother and the underweight person is a small child or infant. Now, this condition is not unique to India. Here's a table looking at the percentage of pairs with an overweight mother and an underweight, stunted, or wasted child by country and region. You see the various regions of the world and then countries within. The purple is overweight mother with underweight child. The squiggly line is overweight mother with stunted child. And the clear is overweight mother with a wasted child. And so you can see that in Guatemala, for instance, about 23% of the dyads, these are mother-child pairs, you have an overweight mother with a stunted child. Now, stunting presents a really interesting challenge because research is showing that stunted children are at an increased risk of being overweight as they enter into adolescence and adulthood. So we are seeing linkages between being underweight at certain points in one's life and that then set up for being overweight later on in life. Why is this happening? Well, when we consider the mother-child dyad, these two people are likely consuming the same food, but with different outcomes. And why is that? Well, one idea is that there's this nutrition transition going on. And these are some photos of India. And the nutrition transition refers to changes in diet, food availability, and lifestyle that occur in countries experiencing socioeconomic and demographic transition. Now, India is certainly undergoing a demographic transition. Here's a little motorbike. We're seeing smaller families in India. The reason I have the picture of the motorbike is that there's kind of a joke among some of the demographers that I met in India that this was one of the best things to bring birth rates down in India because you can get a family of 4 on it. And although I've seen more, I've seen lots of things on these things are amazing in what they can their capacity here. We get nothing out of them compared to what I've seen. They do, there is this kind of joke. They are kind of somewhat limiting. But the reality is Indian families are getting smaller.